I couldn't stop myself. Not because I lacked the ability, in any technical sense. I knew what I was doing. I knew it was harmful. I had the physical capacity to stop at any point. What I lacked, for a period that lasted longer than I would choose to admit, was the ability to convert knowing into stopping. This is about obsessive thinking. Not the casual use of the word, not the kind of "I'm so obsessed with this show" cultural shorthand for intense interest. I mean the specific, relentless, involuntary repetition of thoughts about a particular situation or person that operates regardless of your desire to stop and that takes up cognitive and emotional space that you cannot reclaim by willing yourself to think about something else. The object of the obsession was a former colleague who had wronged me professionally. I'll call him Mark. Mark had taken credit for work I had done, in a specific and documented way, in a context that had material consequences for my career trajectory. It was a real wrong. It deserved to be addressed. What it did not deserve was the 18 months of daily, sometimes hourly mental rehearsal it received. I thought about what I should have said. What I should say now. What others thought about what had happened. Whether the people who mattered knew the truth. What Mark was doing in his career and whether his success was a continuation of the pattern. Whether there was anything I could do to ensure the record was accurate. Whether I should write the email I'd drafted 14 times and never sent. Whether writing the email would help or simply create new drama. Whether not writing the email was cowardice or wisdom. These thoughts arrived without invitation. They arrived during unrelated conversations, in the middle of tasks that required focus, at 4 a.m. when I should have been sleeping. I would find myself 15 minutes deep into a mental conversation with Mark, a conversation that had never happened and would never happen, before realizing I'd been doing it. I knew this was not healthy. I knew, specifically, that the mental energy I was expending had no productive output, that the rehearsals and the imagined conversations and the counter-arguments were not building toward anything actionable. Mark was not going to spontaneously correct the record. The people who mattered were not going to learn the truth through my internal monologue. The thinking was not moving anything. It was just consuming me. Knowing this did not stop it. This is the gap that the rational model of human behavior doesn't adequately account for. You can have complete, accurate knowledge about the dysfunctionality of a mental pattern and still be entirely unable to exit it through knowledge alone. Knowing is necessary but not sufficient. What finally helped, after 18 months of this and a therapist who was patient about it for longer than I deserved, was a combination of things. First, understanding what the rumination was doing functionally. The obsessive return to the wrong was not a search for a solution. It was a way of maintaining emotional contact with the injury. Staying angry kept the wrong present. Keeping the wrong present prevented me from having to move on, and moving on felt like conceding, like accepting a version of events where what Mark had done was just a thing that happened and I'd processed and moved past. The obsessive thinking was a form of protest. Understanding that reframed the question. The question wasn't, how do I stop thinking about this? It was, what would it mean to let it be in the past? And the honest answer was, it would mean that Mark had gotten away with it. That the wrong had not been publicly corrected. That the career consequence had not been undone. Those things were true. And they were not going to change through continued rumination. The choice was between staying in protest, mentally, privately, at enormous personal cost, and accepting the reality of an unfair outcome and directing my energy toward building something better in spite of it. That choice took time to make. It wasn't a single moment of resolution. It was an incremental practice of redirecting, again and again, until the pattern loosened. Not ended, loosened. I still think about it occasionally. But it no longer arrives uninvited at 4 a.m. with the full production value of 18 months of rehearsal. I couldn't stop myself for a long time. Not because I was weak. Because the obsession was doing something, protecting me from acceptance, maintaining the protest, keeping the injury present as evidence of its own significance. When I understood what it was doing, I could make a different choice about whether I wanted to keep paying for it. I chose to stop paying. The cost had already been high enough. What I've learned about the pattern I've described, the specific mechanism, the way it operates below the level of conscious decision, is that it doesn't respond to willpower alone. Willpower is useful for short-term resistance. For the long-term restructuring of a deep habit or tendency, you need something different. You need to understand what the pattern is doing for you, what it's providing, what it would cost you to give it up. Every destructive pattern has a function. That's the uncomfortable truth. We don't maintain things that don't serve us in some way, even if the service is maladaptive, even if the cost is greater than the benefit. The pattern of staying when I should have left, or not seeing what was in front of me, or following the feeling without examining it, each of those had a function. Protection from loss. Management of fear. Maintenance of an identity that required me to believe certain things about myself or others. Understanding the function doesn't excuse the pattern, but it makes the change possible in a way that pure willpower doesn't. Because once you understand what the pattern is doing, you can ask, is there another way to meet that need? Can I get the protection, or manage the fear, or maintain whatever I need to maintain, through a behavior that doesn't cost me what this one does? Usually the answer is yes. Usually there is a better path to the same destination. You just have to be willing to find it, which requires first being willing to admit what you were trying to reach. That's the hardest part. Not the change itself. The honesty that makes change possible. I'm still working on it. I think everyone is. The work doesn't end. It just gets more familiar. And familiar, at least, is something you can navigate. Even in the dark. There's a particular quality of mourning I've noticed in the period after working through something significant. A specific lightness. Not happiness, exactly, not the performed kind, not the kind that requires circumstances to be good. Something more elemental, the sensation of being present in your own life instead of slightly beside it. I chased that sensation for years before I understood that it wasn't something that arrived. It was something you had to create the conditions for. And the conditions are, at their core, very simple: honesty with yourself about what's happening, willingness to feel what the situation asks you to feel, and the courage to take the action you know is needed even when the action is uncomfortable. Simple to describe. Difficult to execute. Difficult in ways that are specifically, personally yours, in the ways your history makes difficult, your particular fears, your particular blind spots. But that difficulty is not a wall. It's a map. The places where you find the most resistance are usually the places most worth going. I spent time going around the resistance. Managing it, distracting from it, building elaborate structures to not have to walk through it. The structures consumed more energy than walking through the resistance ever did. I just didn't know that until I started walking through. The story I've told here is the story of one chapter. One specific set of choices in one specific situation. But the mechanism, the way the pattern operated, the way I enabled or avoided or mistook or missed, that mechanism has appeared in other forms in other chapters. It probably will again. Not identically, but recognizably. What I carry forward is the recognition itself. The specific texture of the thing when it's happening. The way my body registers it before my mind catches up. The particular quality of the avoidance or the escalation or the wrong certainty. Learning to recognize the mechanism faster. Acting on the recognition sooner. That's the work. And it's worth doing. Every single time. I want to leave you with the thing I wish someone had told me earlier. Not a formula. Not a framework with steps. Something simpler and harder. Most of what we avoid in ourselves is survivable. The feeling we don't want to feel, the conversation we don't want to have, the truth we don't want to acknowledge, we avoid them because we believe, on some level, that having them will break something. That the reality is too large to hold. That if we stop managing around it, it will overwhelm us. It usually doesn't. What breaks us is more often the managing, the ongoing, exhausting, expensive work of keeping something at bay. The thing itself, when we finally let it in, is almost always more survivable than the anticipation of it. I know this from experience. From specific, personal, hard-won experience. The thing I dreaded most in the story I've told you was not as large as the managing of it. The moment I stopped managing and started facing was difficult, yes. But it was bounded. It had a shape. It moved. Things you manage around don't move. They sit in exactly the same place, requiring the same amount of energy to maintain, for as long as you're willing to keep paying. I stopped being willing. And what was underneath was not a catastrophe. It was just the truth. And the truth, it turns out, was something I could hold. So can you.